Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Todd Green, and I'm the Executive Director of WorkRise, a research to action network on jobs, workers, and mobility, hosted by the Urban Institute. I want to extend a warm welcome to our event today, Leveraging Workers' Skills for an Inclusive Economy, Tools, Resources, and Evidence. Now, we're delighted to co-host this event with the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, an institution committed to advancing economic mobility and promoting equitable economic growth through policy, research, public events, and partnerships. Now, first, I'll just go over a few housekeeping notes. This event is being recorded, and we'll post the recording online after the event. All participants are muted, but please submit your questions to the Q&A box at any time. We do have closed captions turned on. If you'd like to adjust your settings, click the live transcription button at the bottom. Join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag at live at Urban. Finally, please take a moment to complete our survey at the end of the event. Our event today is focused on sharing actionable resources that can help unleash the potential of a hidden talent pool in our labor market. I'm talking about workers who, because they lack a college degree or post-secondary credential, have been systematically shut out of many opportunities. These are workers who've languished in low or middle wage jobs and have found it difficult to advance their careers, grow their earnings, or build wealth. They're workers who have acquired skills, knowledge, and competencies over the years, but whose wages and titles don't reflect the breadth of their experience. Although educational attainment in the US has been rising, nonetheless, we must remind ourselves that 2/3 of the labor force lacks a bachelor's degree. As Opportunity at Work CEO Byron Auguste wrote this week in the Washington Post, degree discrimination isn't illegal, but it does end up reinforcing existing economic inequalities along racial and geographic lines. Black, Latinx, and rural job applicants disproportionately lose out when employers use degrees requirements to screen out their resumes. Meanwhile, the number of jobs requiring college degrees steadily rises. The tools and research we'll learn about today reveal there is a different road we can take, one that values workers' skills and their experiences as much as degrees or credentials. Today's presentations will tell us more about the portable skills many of these workers bring to the labor market and gateway jobs that can lead to career advancement and economic mobility. In the wake of the stark inequalities magnified by COVID-19 and highlighted by the broad social movement demanding racial justice and equity, many companies, employers are exploring more inclusive hiring practices, but much more needs to be done to break down biases. The narrative of low wage equals low skill still permeates our norms, our practices, and culture. Expanding economic mobility and opportunity for all workers will require dismantling this harmful narrative, actively changing how we recruit, retain, and promote workers, and advancing policies that support both inclusive hiring and the creation of good jobs. Indeed, we're having this conversation about new pathways for economic mobility at a critical moment. Of all the workers in the economy, COVID-19 punished workers in low-wage jobs and industries the hardest. Millions of service sectors jobs have been lost and they're not coming back. Millions of workers have their hours and pay cut, and yet many others are still out of the labor market and are eager to pursue a new direction for their lives and careers. The tools and resources we will share today can help illuminate new trajectories for workers historically excluded from opportunity and whose talents have been underutilized. Putting these tools in the hands of employers, practitioners, policymakers, and workers themselves can help realize our vision for a recovery that is inclusive and is an economy that is resilient. Now, with that, I'd like to introduce the moderator of our panel today. I'm pleased to welcome Ashley Putnam. Ashley is the director of the Economic Growth and Mobility Project, a strategic initiative of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, dedicated to promoting equal access to opportunity. This project is a multi-level effort to bring about entrepreneurial solutions to achieve inclusive economic growth and create pathways out of poverty. Before joining the bank, Ashley served as the Economic Development Advisor for the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development in New York City. Ashley, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Todd. And it's so great to be here with you again. And thank you so much to the team at WorkRise for hosting this critical and important conversation. And as Todd knows well, as an employee of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, I get to kick us off today with my standard Fed disclaimer, which is that my views expressed here today are mine alone and do not represent the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia or the Federal Reserve System. With that said, I just want to open with saying how excited I am to be here having this conversation. As Todd said, this is an incredibly critical moment in our labor market and a moment where we're seeing many of the inequalities and systematic people who have been left out of the labor market increasing. This is something we've been discussing at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, and we have been really laser focused on what it looks like to build a more equitable recovery for workers. Now, I know that's a term that's thrown out a lot, and so I want to share what we define as an equitable workforce recovery. And that is one that acknowledges and examines the root causes of employment disparities, targets interventions to those who are disproportionately impacted, removes barriers to work, training, and education, encourages improved job quality and supports for workers, and increases access to career pathways that lead to financial stability. As Todd mentioned before, I think this conversation is really critical because we're really talking about people who are being left out and talents we are missing. I'll share a personal anecdote quickly before we get started, and that is that I started my career in workforce development at the end of the 2008 and 2009 recession. And I saw firsthand what it was like to speak with job seekers, many of whom had jobs that provided family sustaining wages, who were trying to reattach to the labor market and being told that that job is no longer available to them because it now requires a four-year college degree. And so the things we're talking about today, the tools that these researchers are lifting up are so incredibly critical for that 70% of our country, those talents and those resources that we are leaving behind. And so I'm really excited to be here today with what could not imagine a better panel and group of experts and colleagues who are thought leaders and innovators and just incredible resources. And I hope you will share in my enthusiasm for the tools that they are presenting today. So I'd like to first welcome a colleague from Opportunity at Work, Papia DeBroy. She is the Senior Vice President of Insights. Opportunity at Work is a social enterprise whose mission is to rewire the US labor market so that workers who are skilled through alternative routes, or what they call STARS, can reach their full potential. And that's really what we're talking about today. Papia oversees research to assist private, public, and social sector leaders to improve the economic opportunity of STARS. So excited to be here with you as always. Welcome, Papia.
Thank you, Ashley. And thank you, Todd, and the rest of the WorkRise team for having us here today. As Ashley mentioned, I'm Papia DeBroy, and I'm going to share some insights today from some research we've been doing at Opportunity at Work alongside my colleagues Peter Blair at Harvard and Justin Heck at the University of Michigan. And we've really been focused on trying to understand opportunities to improve mobility for workers without four-year college degrees. As Ashley introduces, we call these workers we've been focused on STARS. They're skilled through alternative routes. And Ivy, we can move to the next page, because one of the things that surprised me to see in the data was that employer behavior has been shifting pretty significantly towards these workers, STARS. When you look at the jobs that were added to the labor market after the 2008 recession, we find about 3/4 of them were ones where employers frequently require the four-year college degree. The fact is that more than 70 million workers in our labor market are STARS, and the vast majority of them actually have the skills to perform in higher wage work. Let's move to the next slide. So how are STARS faring in the labor market? Well, we find, actually, Ivy, I'm gonna push you forward another one here. Another one, and then I'm gonna back up. I'm so sorry. Actually, let's go back, and I'll describe this with my fingers, everyone. So we'll go back a couple of pages to the first slide. One more. Thank you. What we find, though, is that STARS are faring pretty poorly in the labor market. While the wage difference between STARS and workers with the four-year college degree was 30% in 1976, we find that difference grew really significantly. And by 2019, they were earning 62% less than workers with the four-year college degree. They fundamentally had different wage trajectories. When you look at the workers who entered the labor market in 1989, you see that it's only at age 55, so 30 years into their work experience, that they're earning the same salaries that workers who were earning with college degrees did at the age of 25, right? This trend runs counter to the notion that workers can move their way up the economic ladder by translating their learning to earning in the labor market. And we know 2020 has been a terrible year for them. They have experienced the job losses of this year. They have been our frontline and essential workers disproportionately. And as Ashley and Todd have articulated, we have choices to make now, right? How do we bring stars back into the labor market more equitably and fairly? What I hope I might do today is share a little bit about how we're starting to think about exactly that question. So some background. I want to introduce the key concept on the next page here, which is that low wage does not mean low skill. This is a concept that Keith and Marcela and all of us have been thinking about exactly what you see here. Let's say you're a retail worker. You're required to bring persuasion, active listening, speaking skills to your job every day. What we've done is compared the skills required of this occupation to hundreds of other occupations in the labor market. And what we would expect is that a retail salesperson should be able to move to a customer service rep job, right? This is a skills-based job transition. I'm going to have us go back one page, and I want to explain what we've found. We've actually tested this concept. Are the skills that you bring to work every day predictive of where you go next in the labor market? We've studied more than 130 million transitions that workers have made since 2010. And what we find in our paper that we've published in the NBER this month is that there's a high correlation between the skills the worker is gaining and the transitions they make to other jobs in the labor market. That's what you see on the left-hand side of the page here. Skills are the currency workers are using to actually make their moves. One thing that is really critical to understand here is that of the almost 80 million transitions that stars have made, a stunning 60% did not yield an increase in wages. So let's just take that in for a second. When a star transitioned to another job with their skills in the past decade, only 40% of the time did they move to a job that paid more. So we wanted to ask the question, are workers without the degree, stars, experiencing transitions the same way as workers with the four-year college degree? Well, what we found is what you see on the right-hand side of the page here. There's actually a pretty significant difference. Workers with the four-year college degree experienced transitions to higher wages very differently than stars. They get access to far more jobs, and they are less constrained by the skills of their current job. So there's an inability for stars to signal beyond the skills of their current jobs, and that is currently contributing to the inequality stars are experiencing in the labor market. So if we pull up for a second, we're learning that workers are gaining skills. Those skills do predict how workers are moving through the labor market, but those workers are not gaining access to higher wage jobs the same way that workers with the four-year college degree are. Well, that's not what I wanted to see in the data. I remember earlier this year just reflecting on some of this insight with a colleague and telling them I was finding this data pretty depressing. And one of them said to me, well, why don't you focus on the 40% of transitions that are yielding mobility for stars? What might we learn from those? Ivy, let's move forward to the 2 slides here. Yeah, thank you. What we learn here is that there is a blueprint in this data for how we might think about opportunities for mobility for stars. In fact, we find that there are about 300 occupations that yield mobility in the past 10 years, and frequently these transitions occur through a term that we've brought to about 50 occupations in the labor market, which is the gateway job. These are jobs that provide mobility out of job one, and further disproportionately lead to further mobility out of the gateway job. This suggests that stars can achieve mobility, frequently with skills that they've gained on the job. What's also interesting to us about this data is it provides some clues for how we might think about driving more equity into higher wage occupations in the labor market as well. We know that the transitions we've studied are not the same for all stars. Let's move to the next slide. We see, for instance, that Black and Hispanic stars are unable to make the transitions the same way that white stars are able to. And further, we learn that for women, when they traverse the pathway, they earn less than their male counterparts. The data on the page here reflects this drop-off in the proportion of workers in these occupations that pay these wages. But we know workers are gaining skills, and we know that skills-based transitions happen. We have an opportunity in this moment to widen these pathways and include more workers from these historically disadvantaged groups and actually bring more of them into our workforces with some deliberation. What I've discussed today certainly reflects a lot of problems. A lot of these numbers are alarming. What has been heartbreaking for us is to learn what they've meant for real people. Let's move to the next slide. I've included here a quote from one of the more than 50 interviews we've done in the last few months with stars across the United States. And Joanne shared with us the following. I worked at a community college for 2 decades. I was among the first to be laid off when COVID hit, even though I had more experience and skills than many of my colleagues. My previous supervisor once told me that had I gone to college, I would be running this community college. I remembered hearing that quote for the first time, and it gave me chills, and I still feel similarly today. These stories, these incredible people are what have been motivating us as researchers. We at Opportunity at Work think the insight from this body of work across all of these 4 organizations here today is really critical to supporting workers like Joanne, who have valuable work experience and skills and need our system to actually support them more effectively. And we're doing some of that work at Opportunity at Work right now. If we can move to the next page, we've deployed a 2-sided marketplace called Stellar Works, and this is a platform designed to support stars in their upward mobility. Stars frequently feel the same way that Joanne does, discouraged, right? And part of what they need are better connections to training providers and to employers who are willing to consider and hire stars into higher wage opportunities. We think this platform is a first step towards a better connected ecosystem, right? One where there's more transparent information, where stars can be rewarded for the skills they've gained and be hired into occupations for which they have the skills. I'm excited for you to hear more too about some of the other tools that my colleagues have been working on at other organizations, Marcela at Brookings, Keith at the Philadelphia Federal Reserve, and Debbie at the Markle Foundation as well. Thank you, everyone. Ashley, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Fabia. And I love the human perspective you provide and relate very deeply to the frustrations that we heard both in 2008 and 2009 and really exacerbated in this moment. Next, I'm excited to introduce Marcela Escobari, who is a senior fellow with the Center for Sustainable Development at the Brookings Institution. She also leads the Workforce of the Future initiative. Marcela has spent the past several years analyzing occupational trends and transitions in the labor market and identifying pathways for workers out of low-wage jobs. She's also President Biden's nominee to oversee USAID's operation in Latin America and the Caribbean. And she is joined today by Ian Sayal, a senior project manager and research analyst at the Brookings Institute. So welcome, Marcela and Ian.
Thank you so much, Ashley and Todd, and to WorkRise. It's really great to join Papia and this impressive panel of thinkers and doers on this topic of economic mobility. So Ian and I wanted to start by sharing some of our findings from our recent report, Moving Up, kind of as a reminder, as Papia really powerfully showed us, like what is it that we're solving for? And when we started the Workforce of the Future initiative at Brookings, our goal was to address this growing divergence among people and among places. So in doing so, we want to look at both sides of the equation. Right? One is how to create growth and new jobs for the workers that you have in a certain place. And then can those jobs actually translate to opportunity? Because every regional leader knows of this, growing inequality, the fact that the middle class is shrinking. If anything, this problem has been, overdiagnosed. But they're asking, what do I do differently? If I want to drive inclusive growth, what does that actually mean? And so what we're trying to do, along with other folks in this panel, is provide this very rich data-driven guide to answering these questions that can be place specific, right? Because it's hard to think about mobility and creating a middle class or creating middle class wages in a rural community where 15% of jobs without bachelor's degrees will disappear because the coal plant is closing, right? So we want to take them through this roadmap that you see here, which is starting with the demand side, right? How do you grow based on your unique capabilities in a way that creates better jobs? And in a post-COVID world, this might be how do you recover from a contraction and build back better, right? Because not all jobs are created equal. And the supply side, which is how do you help workers then transition to higher paying and higher mobility jobs? And today, it might mean how do you get back into the workforce? How do you recover from dislocation? But even though we've seen severe dislocation in this pandemic, I think dislocation will be a constant. But let me give you an example of what this looks like in action. This is, if you go back one, this is an actual example of demand side analysis for Boise, Idaho, right? Where we try to provide cities using predictive analysis, looking at network analysis and the diversification patterns of all cities through time in the US to determine, what is it that you're good at based on the industries that are already present, and thus which industries are likely to grow and which industries are likely to decline. But it also, this understanding of what's adjacent to you or strategic allows you to be purposeful about the industries that you want to grow, right? And to bring good jobs. So what you see on the left side here is in Boise, we found that, tech industries were actually, budding and growing industries that required a lot of new talent. But and it's something that Boise wanted to bring into their mix of industries. But also, when they actually brought in Chobani, the yogurt manufacturer, it actually absorbed a lot of manufacturing talent at the time that agro-processing had automated and was shedding a lot of jobs. And it doubled the salaries for these workers. So it allows you to make these kind of choices. Now, whatever choices you make translates to the graph on the right that talks about which occupations are likely to grow and decline. And what we hope is then looking at the other side of the supply side is to say, how do these occupations can translate to very specific opportunities for workers? And there, what we use is this new database of job-to-job transitions, where we've linked the CPS month-to-month database of job-to-job transitions for the last 20 years to have this 220,000 transition database where we can look at the example that Papia brought, that retail worker that loses his job. What are the other occupations that might be growing in your particular city that might mean not just a higher salary, but also upward mobility? And we hope that this can give workers a sense of what opportunities exist that have been traveled by other workers. So we know that they are possible, given that retail worker, a set of opportunities. So to go back to that roadmap, this is the demand, the supply side, and to that we also added a more qualitative research on the particular friction points, and in particular the low wage work in the reskilling journey, as well as the needs to complement this with policies and scaffolding for workers, as well as firm level actions that can really make that upward transition possible, right? From affordable housing, transport, childcare, to very specifically the mobility that firms can provide by changing their hiring practices. But let's go deeper to the challenge of mobility. So what we did is, and to do so, we basically added to the CPS data set that I mentioned, we linked it with burning glass resume data and made that data representative of the American workforce, so that now we could see mobility through time with millions of additional data points. And what we found is that low wage work is sticky, and it's strikingly so, right, of the 31 occupations, which employ nearly 20 million workers, where 90% of workers in those occupations pay less than $20 an hour. We find that amongst those folks, only 43% of those workers are able to leave that low wage work to move to jobs that make more than $20 an hour. But what's interesting is that this probability also declines exponentially through time, right? From a 13% chance of that dishwasher to be able to change jobs on their first year to a high wage job to 1% on their 10th year. And also, as Papia showed, that upward mobility is very much marked by gender and racial gaps. So when Asian men, for example, switch occupations, they transition upward 61% of the time, compared to 37% of the time for Hispanic women. And getting a degree actually does narrow that mobility gap, but alone it does not resolve them. So finally, going deeper into this data at the level of the occupation, we think can really get us to a place that is more actionable, right? So for example, when we look at specific pathways, and this is an example in the healthcare industry, we can see as where do barriers exist and for whom, right? So let's start with health aides. This is not a particularly upward mobile occupation, but some people use it as a jumping off to a stepping stone job, which is probably very similar to what Papia mentioned as a gateway job, which is a job that allows you to go from low wage work to high wage work, which is, for example, an LPN, a licensed practical nurse, which then allows you to jump to a registered nurse, which is again a much higher paid job. But we see here that, for example, white workers transition from LPNs to registered nurses at twice as often as Black and Hispanic workers. So I think what we're hoping is that looking at data at this granular level will allow us to unlock places where these transitions are blocked and for whom, right? To really understand what is it that we can do to help that LPN move and make this jump at the same rate than others, whether it's role models, whether it's particular training, whether there's hiring practices, and be much more proactive. Because I think what we see is that simply widening a pathway may only amplify or reproduce these disparities unless we understand what is holding certain workers back. So the role of these kind of jobs, these stepping stone jobs, is really crucial if we are to promote mobility. And I want to pass it to Ian to talk more about these jobs and how our tools are trying to help.
Thanks, Marcela. Unfortunately, these crucial stepping stone jobs, which workers frequently pass through on their way from low to high wage work, are at risk. Our research shows that these middle wage stepping stone occupations are expected to decline faster as a share of employment than non-stepping stone jobs. And so this is a challenge that we really need to tackle by creating new ones and making sure that the ones that exist are wider and accessible to everybody. Marcela shared an example of a pathway where we needed to relieve the barriers that Hispanic and Black workers face, but our approach also allows us to identify pathways where it would make sense to simply widen. So take the example shown here of designers. The left side of this diagram shows that the entry rate for male and female workers into the 5 largest occupations in a technology and engineering occupation cluster. The rates are all very low, which reflects how insular and difficult it is to access the cluster. But those rates are not only small, they're unequal, with men making that transition much more often. Once in the cluster, though, the right side of the figure shows the upward transition rates are also inequitable. But the design occupation is the exception. Not only does design draw female workers into the cluster, it also serves as a stepping stone for women to transition into higher paying jobs within the cluster, such as into computer systems analysis or software and computer engineering. That said, the transition rates from design into the cluster's higher paid occupations are lower than those of the other large occupations. So this suggests ample room to widen the pathways for upward mobility, such as through targeted training programs that teach designers the skills required for computer systems analysis or software engineering jobs. So turning to our tool, when COVID hit, we wanted to focus on creating a tool that would be most useful for dislocated workers and the organizations that support them to help them re-enter the workforce. That gave rise to our mobility pathways tool. And we're pleased that it's been well received. The state of Texas wants to include it in their statewide portal for students and working adults. And it features some of the data that we've discussed. And we think that one group that can leverage the tool are companies who can use it to increase mobility within their organization. For example, if they're having a difficult time sourcing computer scientists and systems analysts, they can use it to understand which roles would feed into the hard to fill positions. We're showing here one maybe counterintuitive example that computer repair people or office machine repairers can make that transition. People have done it in the past. And so companies can increase mobility within their organization, perhaps by trying to source workers in these roles. We're going to continue to add to this tool, and most importantly, welcome your feedback on potential applications and how we can iterate it to make it most useful to folks on the ground. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Marcela and Ian. Fascinating research and excellent work. I'm excited to welcome next my colleague, Keith Wardrop, who is also the Community Development Research Manager at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. And in his role, Keith produces original research that leads to the development of the department's research agenda with a focus on employment opportunities for low and moderate income populations. Hi, Keith, welcome.
Hi, Ashley. Thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be part of this amazing panel. And I'm going to spend my few minutes talking about some research and a tool that my colleagues and I produced to explore what we call a skills-based approach to occupational mobility. The work that I'll describe today builds on a growing body of Fed research on decent paying job opportunities for, as Todd noted in his introduction, the 2/3 of our labor force elects a four-year college degree. And I'm going to use the term opportunity occupation to describe jobs that pay above the national annual median wage, but don't require a bachelor's degree. And these jobs make up about 22% of metropolitan employment in the US, but we know that some people get stuck in lower wage jobs, as Marcela and Ian just described. So we wanted to learn whether and how the skills gained through prior work experience could be leveraged to help workers advance from lower wage jobs to these higher paying opportunity occupations. So on the next slide, not to be outdone by Ashley, I'm going to read my disclaimer that my views are not necessarily those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia or the Federal Reserve System either. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk just a little bit about how we studied this issue. So at its core, an occupation, your job, my job, it's really just a collection or a bundle of tasks that a worker has to complete. And what differentiates my job from yours, one occupation from another, are the skills that a worker needs to complete those tasks. So with that framing in mind, Kyle DeMaria at the Philadelphia Fed and Kyle Fee at the Cleveland Fed and I analyzed millions of job advertisements in the 33 largest metros in the US. And we focused on the 25 most requested skills for each occupation in each metro. So by studying these job advertisements that employers posted, we knew specifically which skills they were requesting in each of these 33 metropolitan areas. And our approach hinges on the notion that these 25 skills define an occupation in a given labor market. Then we compared the sets of skills for every lower wage job and every opportunity occupation, but we focused on the transitions that would produce at least a 10% pay increase for the worker and not require a bachelor's degree. And then we calculated a similarity score for each pair of occupations that assessed the degree to which these occupations require a similar set of skills at a similar rate. And the score ranges from 0 to 1. The higher the score, the more similar the occupations. And any pair with a score over 0.75 we call a top transition. So as illustrated on the next slide, I think one of the things that we noticed first, and I hope will be clear to you on the slide, is the high degree of overlap between the skills requested for lower wage jobs and the skills required for opportunity occupations. You know, we hear a lot about the skills gap, but I think this research suggests that skills can serve as a bridge. So this table lists the 20 most frequently requested skills between 2014 and 2018, again, requested by employers in their job postings. And they're ranked from 1 to 20, and you see the overall intensity score there. And that's just the share of online job postings requesting a given skill. But they're also ranked, these skills are ranked within lower wage occupations and opportunity occupations. And any skill ranked in the top 10 is shaded dark orange. And one of the things that I hope pops out to you is that the first 6 skills are top 10 in both sets of occupations. So these 21st century skills or soft skills like communication, customer service, teamwork, and collaboration, they're universally in demand for these jobs, and they can be transferred not just from one job to another, but from one set of lower paying jobs to another set of better paying opportunity occupations. Now, this is a snapshot for the national labor market. Of course, we all have very specific jobs in specific places. And when we look at specific pairs of occupations, you're going to see some differences. You wouldn't expect a registered nurse and a carpenter to need the same skills. But as the next slide illustrates, we did find what we call a top transition in every metro. And here's a quick example. So this chart shows the skills required for sales representatives of services and retail salespersons in Phoenix. And if the skill is required for both occupations, the bar is shaded blue. You can see that there are a lot of blue bars on this chart, especially at the top for the skills that are most important for this better paying sales representative jobs, skills like sales, customer service, communication. Now, there are some bars that are shaded orange. Those are skills that are required only by or only for the better paying occupation. Marketing, Microsoft Excel, Office. You might think of these as a skills gap. I prefer to think of them as training opportunities. With a little bit of training, a retail salesperson could feasibly make a transition to a sales representative of services and see a very substantial wage increase, as you can see on the chart. Now, the 2 bullets on this slide, I think, are 2 of the most important top line findings from the research. And the first is that we find that almost half of lower wage employment in these metros can be paired with at least one of these top transitions. And that if they're actualized by workers, these top transitions would represent an increase in average annual median wages of 49%, from $30,000 to just under $45,000. Now, I mentioned that we found almost 4,100 of these top transitions. You really can't do justice to that amount of information in a 30-page report. So we worked with our web team to create a tool called the Occupational Mobility Explorer to make the results more interactive. And I'm going to share my screen and just very quickly demo it. All right. So the tool has 3 tabs, and I'm going to start with the Build Your Path tab. I think I mentioned that we studied 33 metros, but I'll choose Philadelphia for obvious reasons. And I'm going to start with cashiers. So it's a very large and very low wage occupation in Philadelphia and in most places. And you can see there's information under the origin occupation to prove that. Almost 70,000 jobs, wages of around $15,000. Of course, we classify this as a lower wage occupation, and we also include the projected national growth rate. In the column next to it, under the first destination heading, you're going to see information, parallel information, for the 10 occupations in Philadelphia that have the highest similarity score with cashiers. Customer service representatives has the highest score at 0.75. Again, you see the number of jobs and wages. You also see the wage increase that a worker might experience moving from a cashier to a customer service representative. So I will add customer service representatives to the path, and it's an iterative process. So the information, the occupations listed under second destination have the highest similarity score with the first destination, with customer service representatives. I'll select title examiners, and we go out four steps. So 3 different destinations, and we find our way to office supervisors, again, with a very high similarity score. So if you look from start to finish, you can imagine a worker spending time within each of these occupations, building their skill set, maybe pursuing additional training or additional education, but not a bachelor's degree, and moving from beginning with a wage of around $15,000 and ending with wages over $60,000. So you can see that you can compare skills for each of these pairs of occupations, but we created a separate tab to give us a little more real estate for that. So again, I'll go to Philadelphia, and I'll choose 2 different occupations. I'll choose maintenance and repair workers and industrial machinery mechanics. And on this tab, any skill that's required by both chosen occupations will be paired together, and we show the share of job ads requesting each skill for each of these occupations, color-coded blue and orange. You see there are a lot of skills in common, shared in common across these occupations. And at the bottom in orange, you'll see the skills that are unique to the second occupation, the better paying mechanics position, that aren't required for the lower paying maintenance and repair worker. So skills like welding, forklift operation, packaging, again, skills that might represent a training opportunity or a skills gap. And then in the third tab, the view top transitions, you can essentially look at the information for all the top transitions we found, either by metro area or overall. I mentioned there were nearly 4,100. You can sort this table, or you can download an Excel file for all this information. So I will stop sharing, and on my last slide, talk about a couple of strategies that I think could help meet the needs of employers and provide workers with the skills that they need to lead to some economic mobility. Maybe forward 2 slides, I believe. One more. There it is. And the first strategy is skills-based hiring, which could expand applicant pools to include workers who don't have a bachelor's degree, but who do have many of the skills required to do the job. And I think for this strategy to work, the onus really is on the employer. For the employer to recognize the portability of skills developed in other, sometimes seemingly dissimilar occupations, for employers to identify the skills they need to create job postings and job descriptions that reflect those skills, and then assess applicants on the skills when filling those positions. To be clear, our research doesn't suggest that a worker could make a top transition without any training whatsoever. You know, these transitions involve very similar but not identical occupations. So targeted training could provide otherwise qualified workers with the skills they need to make a successful transition. And this additional training could be conducted by employers in-house, at a community college or elsewhere. But of course, collaboration between and among the major players, employers, education providers, workforce development organizations would be important to make sure the training meets local demand. So thank you for your time. I'll pass it back to Ashley and look forward to the Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you, Keith. And our next speaker, our final speaker presentation, I'm excited to welcome Debbie Hughes, who is a director of the Markle Foundation and oversees the implementation of the Rework America Alliance, which is composed of more than 30 partners who are committed to opening opportunities for millions of unemployed and low-wage workers, particularly those affected by the current economic crisis. We're really excited to hear about your work. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon. I'm Debbie Hughes, the director with the Markle Foundation. I'm so pleased and honored to be joining you today to talk about how we can help workers leverage their skills and drive a more inclusive economy. Thank you to WorkRise and the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia for hosting this event, and to the wonderful group of presenters, all of whom have shared fantastic insights already. They are also our good partners with whom we share common goals and work with to drive impact in this area. So I have a lot to share, including some additional tools and resources to add to your toolkit today. I'll jump right in. First, I'll explain a little bit about our work and the Rework America Alliance. The Markle Foundation has been working with a broad coalition of partners for the last 8 years on workforce and skill issues. Our theory of change is that if we can move our country's labor market to be rooted in skills versus proxies of one's ability, such as degrees, more workers will have access to opportunity regardless of where and how they acquire their skills. To respond to the employment crisis triggered by the pandemic and to scale our workforce initiatives, the Markle Foundation has formed a nationwide initiative called the Rework America Alliance. The Alliance is aimed at helping displaced workers return to good jobs by driving actions that expand opportunities for employment and broaden ways for all Americans to learn and train for the work of the future. In particular, those without a bachelor's degree, workers of color, and women, so that they can gain access to jobs that pay a living wage and which open up opportunities for future advancement. This is truly a collaborative effort drawing on the resources, expertise, and reach of a diverse set of partners. The Alliance would not be possible without our partners, including the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, the National Urban League, Boeing, Goodwill, CVS Health, IBM, McKinsey, Microsoft, Unidos, Workday, WorkRise, and many others. This initiative has brought together a truly unique and diverse set of organizations, including AFL-CIO, SEIU's HCAP, NAACP, and other worker-serving organizations collaborating with large employers who you do not traditionally see together at the same table. This level of partnership engagement speaks to the national imperative and needs that we as a nation are facing today. And my fellow presenters are partners in this work. Opportunity at Work, Brookings, and the Fed, we're all approaching this work in slightly different ways, but connected by our aspirations to drive change and help people get back to work in good jobs. At Markle, we've focused our work on helping people without bachelor's degrees, working on, or most recently working in low-wage roles by looking at historical job transitions that real people have been able to achieve. This informs the work we are doing to help people move into good jobs. We use these insights to produce actionable takeaways, resources, and tools. There are 4 core elements to our approach. Firstly, identifying the promising job progressions for workers to pursue, which I will speak to in more detail on the next few slides. And to help people to move into these promising jobs, we are identifying high-quality training programs aligned to skills needed for these roles, programs that are affordable, accessible, and effective at helping people to be successful in their new roles. As we know that making these choices and going through these transitions is hard, we're helping to improve the support available to workers by making new resources available to the organizations and individuals that already provide support within their communities. We're developing and sharing digital tools to help career coaches and other support specialists better serve displaced workers. But to open up opportunities, we need employers to change the way they hire and to adopt a more equitable approach to how they source, hire, promote their workforce. We are working with employers to drive practice change and have developed tools and resources to help them take action as well. So what do we mean when we say we're identifying promising job progressions? Firstly, let me explain the terminology we're using. For a more inclusive recovery, we need to support low-wage workers and job seekers, not just in finding jobs, but in finding good, viable jobs. These jobs are viable for people based on experience rather than degrees, are likely to be in demand and unlock economic advancement. Good, viable jobs are the foundation of experience-based job progressions. We describe experience-based job progressions using an origin to gateway to target framework. Origins are low-wage occupations for which workers can move into better jobs. Nationally, they provide less than $42,000 in median annual individual income annually for people without a 4-year degree. Targets are attractive occupations in terms of risk and income, providing salaries of more than $42,000 annually, and have been relatively viable for job seekers from origins without a 4-year degree. These jobs are the ultimate goal. Gateways, which are good jobs in themselves, provide a springboard from origin to targets. They expand job seekers' bodies of skills or broaden existing skills, positioning the job seeker for an attractive target role. For example, one job progression would be from a role as a waiter, which would be an origin, to a training and development specialist, a gateway role, to a sales manager, which would be considered a target. In some cases, job seekers may have undertaken training interventions between jobs to help them progress. In others, they may have benefited from internal promotion. And in still other cases, we may have moved directly to an attractive next job. This year, there will be likely around 1 million good potential opportunities for origin workers via gateway occupations. We will be able to tell people, here is a job that's going to grow in the marketplace. If you've been a retail worker or it's been a hotel worker, that these are the skills that you have from that job and can carry to the next one. For some people, that's going to be a gateway job on the way to their destination. So it'll be a job that is more promising and having a future than the job they had before. It may be a job at the same wage level, however, and from that second job, with some training, they can get into a higher wage job. So when we look at what people have been able to achieve in the past, we have developed a set of actionable insights, which can be read in detail in our publication, Unlocking Job Progression, which I'll put in the chat following my presentation. There are 77 gateway occupations that have been proven to be springboards to economic advancement and can improve racial representation. 70% of job progressions that provide transitions to gateways and targets hinge on transferable interpersonal skills best learned through experience. Gateways and other good viable occupations will account for nearly 20%, or about 1 million of the new jobs over the next year, though there is likely to be intense competition for those roles. Occupations in healthcare, industrial such as manufacturing and construction, and digital roles that cut across sectors will likely provide about 40% of good viable jobs over the next 12 months. So we need to focus on helping workers understand what gateway roles jobs are available to them and how they can move into these roles, supporting them in making this transition, and ensuring employers hire from a broader talent pool to unlock economic advancement for people without a degree. Based on these insights, we've developed tools, a set of tools, working with our alliance partners, workforce decision makers, career coaches, employers, and HR professionals, many of you in the audience today. The main takeaway we really want this audience to see and hear is that our insights have been translated into tools that we want workers, communities, worker-serving organizations to be able to take action on. The first is the Rework Community Insights Monitor. It's an online tool which provides regional perspective on good jobs and training within local labor markets. This includes highlighting the most prevalent industries and occupations, how many of these jobs are accessible to workers without a bachelor's degree. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta led the development of this tool. We've also developed regional, what we call fact packs, where we've applied our insights to create a more granular view of the data we're utilizing to help worker-serving organizations better understand and take action with the communities they're serving. We've developed coaching curriculum and training tools to help coaches and career navigators connect workers to good jobs and training programs. Our Career Coach foundational training delivered virtually helps career coaches apply a skills-based, human-centered, and equity-driven approach to supporting job seekers and how to use new tools. Embedded in this training are 2 additional tools that we've developed. The first is the Job Progressions tool. It's an online tool which enables career coaches and navigators to help job seekers progress into good, viable jobs. The tool highlights advancement opportunities for workers without a degree based on career shifts that other workers have achieved historically. McKinsey led the development of this tool. And then the Skill My Resume tool is an online tool for creating experience-based resumes, which helps coaches to highlight skills that job seekers have learned through their experience and positions them to market themselves to careers in other fields. With one last slide, we're also providing support for employers to adopt skills-based practices and to source talent from new organizations representing highly diverse candidates from non-traditional backgrounds. And the Alliance is working with employers and employer intermediaries to secure commitments to hire workers who have relevant experience but have not been traditionally considered. We have a virtual skillful talent series that allows employers to be moving and taking steps to skills-based practices, a job posting generator to allow employers to build job postings based on skills, sourcing and hiring playbooks and hiring toolkits that allow employers to take action on specific good, viable jobs. And we've been working with HRIT providers to ensure that they, within the HR systems, they're actually able to take action. Just wrapping up, we're working in communities, deploying resources in numerous locations. And I just want to end and hand it back over to my colleague Ashley by saying, very importantly, if these are areas that you're focused on and would like to support, we'd like to know, and I'm here and we're here to engage with you. And so thank you so much. And Ashley, back to you.
Excellent. Thank you to all of our presenters. And I'm going to ask you all to come back on screen now and rejoin us for this conversation. If you are listening in and you have questions for individuals or for folks together, please continue to post your questions in the Q&A. So as mentioned earlier, WorkRise has really been focused on bringing research to bear on action and on innovation. And at the Economic Growth and Mobility Project that I lead, that is really core to our mission. How do we bring research to bear on actual moving the needle in communities, and how do people utilize these tools? So with that in mind, we've invited some additional speakers to join us and help reflect on that. I'd like to welcome Julie Everfield, who's a senior advisor at Opportunity at Work, where she works with executives on aligning diversity and inclusion practices with strategic business initiatives. She has spent her career in the tech industry, including 7 years as the Chief Technology Officer at Capital One, and is here to share with us how do employers think about institutionalizing this? So welcome, Julie. I'd also like to welcome John Schlater, who is the Assistant Manager for Adult Education at the Center of Workforce Innovations, and a nonprofit workforce and career services provider and intermediary based in Valparaiso, Indiana. And so in his work, he works on the front lines with job seekers, coaching them and helping them think about how they navigate this. And this year he's joining us. He's also part of the Rework Alliance, Rework America Alliance. So welcome as well, John. So as we kind of start to think about this, how do we operationalize and make this actionable? How do we actually lead this to moving the needle? I will also want to take a second to say one of the comments we've gotten and questions is there are a lot of similarities between these tools. We also know there's a lot of differences. And so I'd love it if we could just get a couple minutes from each of the presenters to talk about what makes your tool or research unique, what some of the limitations are, and how they complement each other. And so I'm going to start from the top in the same way I'm going to go from Papia, Marcela, and Keith. Just a couple minutes each to share, what is unique and how does your work complement the work of the other presenters here. Papia, I'm starting with you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Ashley.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this whole body of literature is really important for the field, right? Because it allows us to understand how workers have been moving. And what's really nice then is that we also now get to use our imagination in defining where workers might go. Because I do think one of the biggest flaws in thinking about this work more broadly is that the data is inherently backwards looking, right? All data is inherently backwards looking, and therefore it reflects the structural inequities that we see in our labor market. And so as we think about what we want to see in the future, part of what is really interesting, for instance, about Keith's work is that it is kind of sharing what might we envision, right, given where workers are today, for the direction workers could go in the coming years as we think about the recovery.
Excellent. Thank you, Papia. Marcela, Ian, would you share a little bit about what's unique about your work and how does it complement the other work here?
One of the things that I think we all share is that in this world, policy world that gets inundated with widgets and big data, is that many of the tools that got presented here really are part of a theory of change, right? With a clear and well-researched understanding of what is not working and how people can use it. And I think that all of us are there working with certain stakeholders that we hope can use this. And and this is what we're hoping to in this tool, to work on the ground. The original tool actually came from a conversation we had with somebody at Goodwill who said, you have all this data, but wouldn't it be super valuable if my coaches would have this so that they can look around the corner when somebody walks in the door, which is usually not a white collar worker, and says, what's available for me? What could I do? And what's available in this town? And I think that feedback loop of being able to talk and engage with policymakers, and for us, we try to do that also at the regional economic development side, is what makes and will continue to make these tools useful.
Excellent. Thank you. Ian, did you want to add anything to that? Okay, I'll turn over to Keith. Limitations, how does it connect? Tell us a little bit what's unique about your tool.
Sure. So when we started this research in late 2019, none of this work existed at the time. So it's just amazing how much has been done in this space in the last not even 2 years. And not just the quantity, but the caliber of the work. It's just phenomenal. So compliments to all my co-presenters. So I think Papia hinted at the one facet that differentiates our research and tool from some of the others is that it's more aspirational. I think that a lot of the research that you've seen today depends necessarily on large national data sets and online resumes to understand what job transitions have happened. And this is extremely valuable. And we use that same information to sort of ground truth our research. But our approach, I think, seeks to shed light on not just what has happened, but on what could happen in the labor market. And then I would also say one other thing that might differentiate our research from some of the others is that we focus on skills shared in common across occupations to identify transitions, but that process also explicitly showcases the skills that separate two occupations, right? The skills that are different between occupations. And because those might represent barriers to workers making a transition, we think by highlighting those differences, we can inform training conversations in a way that could make the training more targeted, more efficient and less costly for everyone involved.
Excellent. Thank you, Keith. And Debbie, I mean, the Rework America Alliance, first and foremost, you guys have just a ton of incredible, useful tools from job seekers to employers. And so, I know I'm asking you to comment on one, but you have so many. But how do you see kind of the work that you all have done? What is different, and how does it complement the work that's already been done in the field?
Yeah, so thank you. And thank you to my colleagues. So, over the last year and a half, it has been just exciting to watch this burgeoning community of practice that didn't exist, to Keith's point, like come into fruition and develop. And I think we all take slightly different approaches, but very complementary. And the work that we've focused on is how do you use historic transitions to support mobility, and how do you look at the role of job progressions, which is really, I think, a commonality amongst all of our organizations. The Rework America Alliance, I think, where we are able to build on the work of our colleagues is that we've changed it into actionable tools and resources, and are deploying it in communities all across the country, where we're thinking about how do you put these insights in the hands of the community members, worker serving organizations, employers, who can then take action, and who amongst the community, employers, WSOs, policymakers, all need to have tools and resources to be supported in being able to support these job seekers to have opportunities for better jobs. So it's the tools, but it's also the tools for a number of different audiences.
Very true, Debbie. And I will say the resume builder to me was very exciting as someone who previously worked in direct service. And I spent a lot of time talking with people who didn't realize that, while I was working in the PTA, I was building these really critical skills. And so a lot of this conversation is also about how do we better signal in the labor market the incredible competencies and talents that individuals have that we're often leaving behind because we really just rely on a credential to be our signal of whether or not someone is qualified for a job. I want to bring in Julie here because Julie, you come from this background in private sector. You're now working at Opportunity at Work. This is one of the critical questions we're having, right? It's great to talk about this in theory, but how do you think about how employers institutionalize and operationalize these practices? And as you've listened to these tools, how do you think they could benefit other companies who are, I want to do skills-based hiring, but I don't know what it means. And I'll share, we've done some work here with our Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce. They've outlined skills-based hiring as one of their big goals. But when you get down to it, when you hit the nuts and bolts of actually doing it, I think that's where a lot of companies struggle. And so I'd love to hear your perspective on how we operationalize this.
Yeah, no doubt. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with these amazing folks that are creating amazing tools for us to address these problems. And I can tell you, Ashley, that from my experience of spending 3 decades hiring hundreds of technologists and the last several years really working on trying to promote diversity in the tech field, I never really fully appreciated some of the strategies that we were overlooking until I was exposed to the Opportunity at Work information. And that's what got me engaged in their mission. And, hearing even more insights today has been really compelling. And I do think, for an executive at a Fortune 100 company, I wasn't always hearing information like this, even when I felt like I was seeking it and fairly well informed. So I think despite the fact that, we want to have diversity and we want to offer jobs in a wider profile of workers, we're not always aware of the mistakes that we're making and the vast impact that we're having on the labor market in providing opportunities for good jobs, and quite honestly, how ineffective employers can be at times in signaling the needs and skills that they're looking for in job seekers and the people who support them, like the coaches and training providers. And I will tell you that also, if I think about my own experience, my only real exposure to alternate pathways was through great organizations like Europe and Perscullis and some of the others that have been named here. But those investments in companies are often really limited in scale. And although they're amazing, important work, they often are servicing opportunity youth. And I think as an employer, I thought of this population of opportunity youth as the limitation of what we needed to think about, when in fact, opportunity youth make up only 3 million of the 70+ million stars. So, I mean, I think these tools that Markle and Brookings and the Fed and Opportunity at Work have created here can really help employers appreciate that not only does this broad population of workers exist, but really truly what are those skills that are being developed in stars through all these alternative routes, and how those stars can build, how those skills really build to those really good jobs. And I think employers often have the right intent to open up pathways, but they really don't know where to start. They don't have appreciation on what are the best jobs for stars and the types of skills that stars have been acquiring through these other routes. They might not even know which job to remove the 4-year degree requirement from, especially within industry and geography. And I think some of the most compelling work that I heard today about the tools is that location really matters, right? And tapping into a star's talent pool locally really matters, right? You need to match the skills and of the demand and the skills of the stars in a local region, because that's really where the work happens. I think that was, to me, some of the most compelling work that I've seen out of this organization, of these organizations. So I think overall, Ashley, I think these tools give a little bit of a dig here sign to employers, like this is where to look, this is where to start. They give tremendous potential to help employers to know where to start and to take this content and research and really use it to influence their talent strategies. And I just hope maybe some of the next steps are that we develop even deeper partnerships with the companies that really want to drive change and can really help us influence and understand how these tools can really drive behavior change in companies at scale.
Excellent, amazing. Thank you so much, Julie, for that perspective. And I think, we all share in that conversation about our employers aware, right? And then how do we think about those partnerships that could be happening at a local level, right? Because solving for this may not be, one massive one-size-fits-all solution, but could be really about how do employers think about tapping into some of those local resources, and like Debbie shared, how do we think about those partnerships with people you're not aware would be incredible assets to your company. I do want to turn it to John as well, who's joining us. John, you work directly with job seekers, right? You're thinking about how do you communicate to them how they better signal their skills in this labor market, particularly, for folks who do not have a 4-year degree and are trying to get into these jobs and demonstrate that they have these competencies. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more of your reflection on these tools, and have online hiring platforms made this worse or better? What do you think as you were walking through this work of how you operationalize it?
Thanks, Ashley. So it's such a pleasure to be here and part of this panel. And for those that are not aware what we do in adult education, we work with a different subset of stars, which are those almost exclusively who do not have their high school diploma. So they're working towards their high school equivalency degree. And in the two biggest counties that we serve here in Northwest Indiana, it's an average of 9% of adults 18 to 64 don't have their HSE. So it's a massive population. And full disclosure, I have to say, I had not seen a lot of these tools before the presentation today, and I'm completely blown away by the way that they're going to be able to tackle many of the problems that we face in adult education. So that's all I have to say. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Everything's been covered. I'm just kidding. But I want to go back to something that Papia was talking about, which is the feeling of being discouraged that a lot of stars have. And that's something that we encounter very prominently in adult education. And the way that we're getting around it is by providing career coaches in all of our learning centers. And it's the career coaches is such a loaded term, I'm finding, because it sounds like somebody, if you're not familiar with the job, that sits down and says, so what kind of job do you want to do? Where do you want to go? And that's not a question that a lot of adult education students are ready to answer when they first meet you. So what we're finding is that you have to first coach to the emotional position, that discouraged feeling that a lot of adult education students have when they join our program. And once we get around that, which can take a significant period of time, then we're able to start working with them to figure out what kind of path they want to get on. But that discouraged feeling still kind of comes back. And I wanted to go to, so one of the tools that just blew me away was that the pathway tool that Keith showed, because a problem that we see with adult education students is when they start from a position where they don't have their high school diploma, it's very difficult to see the entire map. You know, they might have an idea of where they want to go, but to understand all the steps along the way is very overwhelming for them. And our career coaches have been reporting back to us that we don't know the right amount to explain to these people. Do I just tell them the start and the finish? Do I tell them every step in between? That feels overwhelming. So figuring out a way to visualize and sort of condense their entire pathway into something that's digestible by our students has been a humongous challenge. Yeah, like I said, I'm blown away by that pathway tool because I think that's amazing. And then to your question about the online job posting sites, as somebody who receives applications from one of the major sites, I can tell you it can be very overwhelming for employers. And so to me, it kind of seems like a double-edged sword that's probably made the problem a little bit worse. Yes, there's this huge benefit of people being able to quickly fire out resumes and applications to lots of different companies at the same time. But as an employer, you get flooded with these things. And so it's to go back to something Keith said, the onus is on the employer to then recognize that you have to just not quickly, sort them into piles of meets the criteria and doesn't meet the criteria. You need to look at their skills and figure out if these people are actually going to have what's going to, help in that position. And then as far as doing resumes for those types of sites, our adult education students very frequently don't know what skills are transferable, and would even struggle probably to articulate what their skills are. So that just goes back to the need for a career coach. And career coaching is such a complicated thing because it requires a lot of regional knowledge about the opportunities that are available and to be able to recognize those skills. So if you're working with a student and they say, using the cashier example from earlier, they say, I was a cashier, you're not hearing, oh, you've worked retail. You're hearing all these other skills that you can then help them to tailor their resume for applications that have more upward mobility.
This is fantastic. Great insights, John. And I remember being in your shoes and walking people through these navigations and how frustrating and discouraging it can be. And so grateful for folks like you who remind people of the incredible skills and assets they bring to the labor market, and help them find those pathways that they can transition. We are going to switch over now to some of the audience Q&A. So I see some fantastic questions coming in, some of which we were planning to ask already. So this is kind of perfect. And the first one I love because it really gets at, again, what we think about a lot. How do we operationalize and institutionalize? How do we bring this research into action, right? So the question is, what is your ideal vision for how these tools are adopted in the workforce field? What organizations or roles do you see beginning to use these ASAP? So I'm going to walk through kind of backwards, actually. I'm going to start with Debbie and then go to Keith and then Marcela and Papia. And Debbie, I know you have lots of tools that you can see people picking up. So what do you see organizations or roles beginning to use these tools?
Yeah, I think that it needs that the community to action piece of this is actually where we really create impact. So for example, our employer work through the Alliance, we're deploying skills-based practice change efforts. And I saw a number of questions on that. But we're also doing that to capture impact. So we see a lot of commitments. What are the employers actually doing? And now that we have the job insights work, how can we then tie that to good, viable jobs and the demand for those roles and connect that demand to worker serving organizations and communities where there are workers? And so the data and the tools to serve as a bridge to action is something that I think really becomes so important. We know the jobs, we know the employers. It's non-obvious, like that it's not linear. So it requires us to come in and intentionally partner and work with community members, but worker serving organizations, coaches, policymakers in communities, we're talking about how do you take this data? What are the actual jobs? What's the real demand? Who are the employers who are hiring for these roles? Are those employers actually asking for bachelor's degrees Can we ask them to remove those bad, like, that it allows us a real life window into the roles and a place to start the conversation on the ground. And I think that becomes extremely important.
Yeah. Keith, any thoughts on who or what roles you could see people beginning to use these tools and how they could be adopted?
Sure, it's been a really, it's been an interesting process. We released the tool in December, and we've held, I'm not sure how many different demonstrations and conversations. And I think one audience that's been particularly interested that we didn't expect was one that John mentioned. It was sort of career navigators and career counselors who said that the tool could help their clients envision a different future, to help their clients see a way out of lower wage work. That I think was inspirational for them. So that was a really gratifying example to hear. We've also worked with community colleges who have partnered with employers to think through training for some of their students. So ways to develop targeted training for in-demand jobs using some of the data we've been able to provide. And then lastly, I think, as I said before, I think the rubber hits the road with employers, especially employers who might be interested in diversifying their workplace. I think that the tool can help employers rethink their recruiting practices, rethink the pools they're fishing in potentially, and potentially bring on a more diverse workforce, but also one that's just better able to be productive and to hit the ground running more quickly because they have the skills that the employers are looking for.
Marcela?
Couple quick examples. One is similar to Keith. We hope that employers can use this, not just from the hiring perspective for entry-level workers, but as a less risky way to think about providing promotions and training internally to workers they might have not considered for jobs that they're seeing having difficulty hiring, and making it much cheaper than hiring and firing. So we definitely think there's a win-win there. And the other one is to regional leaders. We've been working with the Texas Higher Ed Board, who has gotten a lot of GEAR funding, and they're trying to think, well, how do we use the stimulus funding, not just to plug the hole in many community colleges, but help them set up for the future in a way that it can create opportunity for dislocated workers. So they're using this data to say, in each location, which is different in Dallas than El Paso, what are the jobs that provide mobility and higher wages that are growing locally and nationally, but also this additional lens of, so that you don't end up with surgeon up here, that absorb your current unemployed workers. So it's realistic to creating opportunity for your currently unemployed workers. And they're using that to be able to determine what kind of credentials, what kind of degrees are actually high value when it means to making that change. And those are the kind of players that we hope can use it at this time where they are going to be receiving a lot of funding that might be helpful to set up for to set their economies for the future.
Excellent, Papia.
Yeah, I think all of these are great. I think another one that we've been hearing frequently is where do I start from employers, right? So there has been a genuine shift, and I think a mindset and beliefs about workers in the United States in the past year. And I really think a lot of folks are trying to think about what change may look like within the four walls of their organizations, and they're struggling with where do I start, right? And I think these tools lend some insight around precisely that, right? So it's not that you need to remove the four-year degree requirements for your doctors and your lawyers and all jobs within your organization, but there is an opportunity for you to select a few, right? And Marcela and Ian's tool can help you figure out where you can think about sourcing workers for that occupation. Keith's tool can help you think about skills adjacencies, and those are really important insights for employers. I think one of the other notes I'll just add, though, is that there are a lot of new to world training providers that have started to think about how where they should be focused in training workers, and employers have a hard time just understanding who these new folks are, what skills they're training for, and what workers are actually qualified for the occupations they have. Our platform StellarWorks is actually aggregating training providers in local regions and providing that information for employers. So you don't need to go meet hundreds of training providers in your region. There is kind of a one-stop shop of just, you can learn about those providers in one location, and you can think about sourcing stars that way as well. So I think the where to start question is actually a really important one, right? As we ask people to move from insight to action.
Yeah, absolutely, Papia. And I think I have heard similar reflections from employers when they've said, sure, we want more diverse talent pools. We want to think about the city of Philadelphia. I think we're over 70% of our population does not have a 4-year degree. But then they get into the how do I actually do it, and are often overwhelmed by, I'm approached by 15 different organizations and I don't know how to start, and I don't know what this tech training program trains for versus this one. So Julie, I'm going to throw this next question to you because I think it kind of follows really closely on the heels of what Papia was just saying. One of the questions was if you could comment on how do employers verify that job candidates have the skills identified as necessary, and should they move from credential-based to skills-based hiring? And again, other folks, Papia or John, are welcome to jump in here too. The comment notes, part of why credentials serve the purpose they serve is they offer a certain efficacy or convenience around screening in applicants. So what would replace that? And how do you think about where people start there? So Julie, I'll turn that to you first, and then other folks who want to comment on that, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, Ashley, I think this is a really fundamental question, and one that I think my employers and other employers struggle with. But I think in reality, we sometimes just kind of get a little bit complacent, right? Maybe we have a college degree ourselves, we get into a decision-making position, and we just believe that everybody that wanted a college degree got one. And we don't really appreciate that we're leaving behind this huge population of talent that really does, in fact, have skills to do the job. But this is a question. Okay, so if I'm going to remove that 4-year degree, then how do I know that those skills exist? And I think, I think a lot of companies actually have assessment processes. They basically use the 4-year degree simply as a filter, and then they start to go through their skills assessment, right? And so if they have confidence in their skills assessment process for hiring, why do they need that filter at the top of the funnel? By just removing that filter and saying, I'm going to use the assessment processes I use today. In the tech field, we have a lot of, testing that we do for tech skills. We have different interview processes. If you just leave those same processes in place and have confidence in those processes, and you understand that there are these 70 million workers that are acquiring skills in a lot of different ways, including these training programs that Papia mentioned, I think you can just start to appreciate that you're leaving behind this huge population of people that you never see. And so I think we say sometimes that we're going to do skills-based hiring, and our assessment processes allow for that. But when we put that filter for 4-year degree at the very top of the funnel, there's just so many people that we never saw. So we don't even know whether or not our skills assessment process would even, bring them into the organization. And so I think to start to experiment with that and to start to have more confidence in our assessment processes and just remove that filter, we'll start to learn a lot more about, what are the right skills to be looking for, and what does success actually look like. And it's, to believe that the 4-year degree is the only way that people develop skills or learn or have the credentials for long-term success is just, I think, a myth, right, that we need to overcome.
Papia, John, Debbie, anyone want to add to that question of how do employers start to verify these skills? All right. Papia, yeah.
I was just going to add, it's really interesting to just observe what's happening in a lot of local communities, because employers chat with each other, right? And they learn a lot about, oh, this is a program I've been hiring from, and it has I've now established this relationship with this program, and I'm bringing in all these qualified candidates. And one of the observations we have is there has to be a better way to aggregate that information so that employers can learn from each other faster, right? We don't have the time to let each, individual employer learn this insight about each program individually. And so I think that's one of the other insights we're trying to build on is how can we aggregate that information about where employers are sourcing stars more effectively and share that back with each other so that programs can grow and employers can actually expand their pools of talent as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add on that because I agree with everything Papia and Julie just said. I think that you're seeing an unprecedented willingness from employers, and it's not just nominally they want to move towards skills-based practices, and that is proving to be either more intimidating or more difficult, I think, and so having a place to start is very important, and identifying which roles. I think to Pavia's point, having a place to start allows an employer to show that it's attainable, and then connecting it to good jobs or connecting it to roles where there's demand, where we can talk about how do you make that job better, or how do you add in job progressions into that, or how do you look at the different components of sourcing talent, hiring talent, promoting talent, all based on skills. Because it's not just about bringing talent in based on skills, it's also creating the culture for that star or that employee to be successful over the time that they're at that job.
Could not agree with you more on that comment, Debbie. It's not just about opening the door, it is also about retention and moving people up within your organization. And I think collectively, a lot of these tools point to this. So I'm going to do one last rapid fire question because we had a lot of questions on this, which is about how we would work with state and local government. And one of the questions is, if you had 60 seconds with a state official or a local government official, what is one thing you would ask them to do in response to this research and this work? So I'm going to go really rapid fire here. And I'm actually going to ask also John and Julie to weigh in, but I'm going to start with Papia and just go down the list like we did with the presentation. So Papia, then Marcela, then Keith, then Debbie, and then Julie and John.
Sure. I would say find your stars, right? There are stars in all of our communities, and these are workers with tremendous skills who have a lot to bring to the power of a local economy. And the first step in getting them there is to identify them, right? And so that's a pretty straightforward thing for folks, but it's one that I think many of us overlook. It's just let's recognize these workers to start.
Great. Marcela.
Quickly, and this will be part of our next phase of this tool on the industrial policy part. I think leaders can understand, which is real, that their talent is probably the biggest capability that they have to attract industry. And right now, that's not the currency. And I think the more that we search for companies to understand talent is what's going to make you thrive in a place, and for places to know that that's the currency, we will see more, less tax incentives and more investment in people. And I think we hope that our tools can actually inform a little bit of this equation so that we can move to those kind of discussions.
Love that. You're speaking to my heart. Keith.
So my colleague Kyle Fee likes to call our tool a conversation starter. And so I think I would encourage local stakeholders to use our tool, the other tools that were presented today, use them as conversation starters in their region. The local stakeholders, they know how the dynamics of this unsettled labor market are playing out locally. They know what the needs are, they know what the skills of the workforce are, and they have the relationships that are required to bring the right parties, including the largest employers, to the table.
I think I would say to help expand access to good quality jobs, policy should incentivize more training offered by employers and labor partners when that training is connected to quality jobs and inclusive hiring practices. And I would also say that funding for intermediary organizations to work with groups of employers to improve job quality and training opportunities would be the two areas I focus on.
Excellent. Julie.
Yeah, I think there have been some great ideas here. I would say the same. I think inviting in the employers in the region and really helping them appreciate the things they do not understand and the barriers that they're creating. I mean, I mentioned that I just didn't have a strong appreciation for just how big this pool of stars were and how qualified they are for really good jobs if we just open up opportunity. So I think bringing together that ecosystem that is inclusive of employers and asking them to bring great ideas and big ideas that they're willing to, you know, really fund and get behind would be my recommendation.
All right, and John, you get to close us out.
Oh, what a privilege. I would say that you know, I would encourage a state rep to use their outreach to have community chambers of commerce, you know, start to recognize and connect with businesses to say that a lack of a degree or a credential does not correlate to a lack of talent. And when you have an employee that's on that path of upward mobility, you want to encourage practices and processes that remove barriers for these people, such as things like work from home and on-site childcare, gas cards, that sort of thing. Because so often when you are dealing with somebody like that, once one domino falls, they all fall. And so if we can encourage practices that help them to be more stable, you're going to have a better talent pool.
Thank you. There's just so much here in terms of just a wealth of knowledge and resources. I feel like I could spend another hour talking with all of you. So I encourage folks who are listening today, you know, if you heard some interesting research, please reach out to our panelists. Please find the resources here at the end. We have dropped some of them in the chat and we'll be sharing some around. But I just want to say thank you to this incredible group of panelists. Many of you have been thought partners and colleagues in the work we have done around skills-based hiring and diversity and talent pipelines, many of you for many years. And I really enjoyed this conversation. And I hope that folks listening in came away with some real actionable things that they can go explore and begin to have those conversations with local government, with employers, with community colleges, with job seekers. So thank you all so much for being with us today. We really appreciate your time, your expertise, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you.